Speak to us about the importance of this relationship between the state and the people.
The concept of democracy in this sense is because of this social contract between the ruler and the ruled. Then therefore the whole point of democratic governance is to ensure that the ruler does not abuse power. So the containment of the authority of the state and preventing abuse of power is at the root and the foundation of democracy. That's what it really means. So if that is so, then there has to be respect for the fundamental rights of the people. There is separation of powers between the three organs of government, that is parliament, executive and the courts, but there has to be respect for each other's performance, and there has to be this kind of cooperation and responsibility to each other. So what happens in this case is, if there is lawmaking and policy making, then naturally it has to be a consultative process, because if it is going to be people oriented, their task is to the parliament, the executive and the judiciary are supposed to have this central focus on realizing the well-being of the people. Now you can't do that if you do policy planning and legal regulation without any consultation. And very often we have in this country laws, nobody knows who drafted it. And as one of the great justices in England said, conceived in secrecy, brought forth in obscurity. So for example, the anti-terrorism law, look at the definition of terrorism, so vague. Look at the online law, so vague. Who drafted? We don't know. So this kind of drafting, legislative drafting, is totally contrary to the democratic process. But there have been good examples. There was a time we have served, many of us have served, in consultative roles with government on legislation.
Right.
If you think of the domestic violence legislation, look at the engagement of women's groups. Look at the right to information law, which would have concerned all of media. It was a hugely consultative process. And that law is now being referred to even in that IMF, I think, diagnostic assessment report as a good law. So recently what we have had is bad laws. We don't know who drafted them and we don't know what emerges. So the whole concept of policy formulation, legal draftsmanship, and indeed even policy implementation should be a participatory process with the engagement of stakeholders who are the people. In fact, in the case of the Eppavala case, I remember when the policy was faltered, the famous Eppavala case on the exploitation of the phosphates, in the judgment itself, the court received reports from a battery of experts led by the late V.K. Samaranayaka on what the implications were. And they used that to say, well, why didn't you do this? And so the court struck down the policy decision. So consultation, Sonali, is absolutely critical to both lawmaking and policy formulation. So when we don't have that, then what happens? Lawmaking becomes a process to aggrandize power to the executive. That is very typical of authoritarian governance, not democracy.